Southampton County, Virginia, August 1831. In the hours between deep night and fading day on August 23rd, bodies were discovered along 16 miles of farmland. Men, women, children, entire families gone inside their own homes. Local papers held back names. The courthouse locked away testimony for 60 years. When the militia finally reached the county, they killed more than twice as many people as had died at the start, most of them innocent. For generations, Virginia textbooks would smooth it over with a timid phrase, the Southampton incident. But the fields knew better. The truth was written there, bold and terrible, in acts that forced a question the country had dodged since its birth. What happens when people who have nothing left decide they would rather die free than live enslaved? This is the story of Nathaniel Nat Turner and the brief uprising that made the South shudder. The Virginia Nat Turner entered on October 2, 1800, was a tangle of contradictions. The man who wrote "All men are created equal" owned hundreds of human beings. The state that produced a parade of early presidents also held one of the nation's largest enslaved populations, nearly 500,000 people. Southampton County fit these tensions perfectly. It wasn't the brutal rice fields of South Carolina or the vast tobacco empires farther south. It was quieter, no less sharp. The soil, worn down by generations of tobacco, pushed big plantations to break apart into smaller farms. White landowners sold surplus people south to the cotton frontier in Alabama and Mississippi, ripping families apart, sending loved ones toward an uncertain horizon that rarely led back. By the numbers, Southampton was majority black. Roughly 7,600 enslaved people and 1,800 free people of color, compared to about 6,200 whites. The county seat, Jerusalem, was little more than a courthouse and a cluster of churches. Swamps, pine forests, and the slow curves of the Nottoway River carved the landscape. Beyond the fields, the great dismal swamp offered cover to those who ran and sometimes managed to stay gone. Nat Turner was born on Benjamin Turner's farm. His mother, Nancy, had been carried from Africa and carried into her son a steady hatred of bondage. His father's name is lost, but his departure is not. He escaped north when Nat was young, proof that freedom wasn't a rumor but a direction. Nat was different from the start. He learned to read and write, rare for an enslaved child in Virginia. The white family that owned him tolerated it, maybe even encouraged it at first. He devoured the Bible, found his voice as a preacher, and people listened. Some called him a prophet because of the visions, moments that felt like messages. As a boy, he described things from before his birth so precisely that elders grew uneasy. At 21, Turner ran. For 30 days he lived on his wits in the woods and swamps. Then he turned back. He would later say a spirit spoke to him. His mind had drifted to earthly things. He was to return and wait. To many, coming back made no sense. But the visions didn't stop. They sharpened. In 1825, lights in the sky. On May 12, 1828, words in his mind. The first shall be last, and the last shall be first. He stopped thinking about escape and began thinking like Moses. By 1830, Nat had been sold to Joseph Travis, a wheelwright married to Nat's legal owner, Sally Moore. Travis wasn't a notorious tyrant by the standards of the day. He fed people. He didn't whip for sport, but a cage with soft straw is still a cage. Nat worked the fields and the shop and waited for a sign, all while the economics of slavery tore his family apart. His wife, Cherry, and their children were sold to Giles Reese nearby. He could sometimes see them, but they belonged to another man. In February 1831, the cruelty got a precise cutting edge. Reese's son used Nat's son, his child, as collateral for a debt. A few days later, on February 12th, an annular eclipse crossed Southampton. The sun became a ring of fire with a dark center. Nat saw a black hand across the face of the sky. He didn't think in metaphors. To him it was a message, begin. He moved carefully. He confided in only a few, Hark, called Hercules, Henry Nelson, and Sam. They were steady men, not drunks, not hotheads. They chose July 4th, Independence Day, to start. Nat fell ill. The date slipped by. They waited. On August 13th, the sun turned strange, a bluish green. People wrote about it in letters. Scientists now talk about distant ash in the sky. Nat saw confirmation. Sunday, August 21st settled hot and heavy. In the woods near Cabin Pond, the core group met. They roasted a pig. They brought in 2 more, Jack, Hark's brother-in-law, and Will, a man with anger close to the surface. The plan was brutally simple. Move from house to house under dark, kill the enslavers in their beds, gather weapons and recruits, ride for Jerusalem, seize the armory, and if the county rose, carry the spark farther. If the militia swarmed, retreat into the great dismal swamp where white posses feared to follow. It wasn't madness. It was strategy drawn from the map they lived on. Around 2 a.m. on Monday, August 22nd, they leaned a ladder to an upstairs window at the Travis house. Nat slipped in first, let the others through, and moved in silence through rooms where people slept unafraid. Doors were unlocked. Why lock doors in a county where black people had been forced to bow for 2 centuries? Nat lifted a hatchet and swung at Joseph Travis, missed the kill. Travis screamed awake. Will stepped in and finished it. In quick succession, the household died. Accounts differ on who remembered the infant. The court records are cold. The group took guns and horses and a sword that Nat kept. In the gray wash of dawn, he used the sword to drill his men in formations he'd watched white militias perform. Austin, enslaved on the Travis place, joined. They were 8 now. They went next to Salathiel Francis, a poor white farmer. They killed him in his bed. His enslaved man ran. Shots missed him. At each stop, they did the same math. Speed or thoroughness. Move fast enough to keep the alarm behind them. Thorough enough to leave no quick rider to Jerusalem. At Piety Reese's farm, where Cherry, Nat's wife, and his children lived, he did not stop. He could have tried to take them, but he didn't. Maybe he knew family on the ride would slow them and doom them all. Maybe he believed this was war, and war demanded hard choices. By mid-morning, some enslaved men along the route joined. Others refused out of fear, loyalty, or uncertainty. The group didn't force hands. Every step put other black people at risk, but the choice to join or not remained with each person. At the Whitehead place, they met the heaviest toll. Widowed Catherine Whitehead lived with her family and an elderly mother. The rebels arrived before anyone could run far. Nat himself killed Catherine's daughter, Margaret. It's the only death he directly carried out. He confessed as much later to a lawyer named Thomas Gray. Why? A leader willing to plan the violence. Hesitated to kill with his own hands remains. Murky, faith and role and pressure braided. Together in ways no record can unwind. By noon, about 45 people lay dead across multiple farms. Turner's band had grown to roughly 60, some on foot, some mounted, grabbing what weapons they could. Axes, clubs, old muskets, knives, tools turned deadly. They bent their path toward Jerusalem, expecting the armory to tip the odds. But alarms travel faster than horses. Survivors fled. Neighbors warned neighbors. Men gathered with guns. Near James Parker's farm, a small force of armed whites stood ready. The rebels outnumbered them but lacked practice under fire. The defenders had position and they'd shot before. The rebels broke and regrouped in the woods. Turner tried to hold the center, to turn the stumble into a stride. But by evening, the cross-current was too strong. Militia from neighboring counties, volunteers, even men coming north from North Carolina. At Thomas Ridley's place, Turner counted perhaps 40 still with him. Exhaustion set in. Some who joined at daybreak had already melted back into the trees, hoping to reach their home farms and deny involvement. Just before dawn on Tuesday the 23rd, a jitter on the line spooked the camp. Sentinels heard movement, checked it, found nothing, but their return tripped panic in the dark. Men ran. The sun rose on a smaller force. They made one more push toward Samuel Blunt's plantation, believing it empty. It wasn't. Blunt and 5 men held the house and fired from the windows. The rebels scattered. Turner slipped from his men in the chaos. The uprising, as a coordinated effort, was done. Not 48 hours old. What came next was fury. News raced across Virginia and into surrounding states. Within days, close to 3,000 armed men crowded Southampton. Virginia and North Carolina militia, federal troops, volunteers out for vengeance. The number of guns on the ground eclipsed the county's white population. Mobs swept the countryside. They didn't check affidavits or gather sworn statements. In too many places, being black was judged as proof enough. A Richmond editor who came to witness the aftermath wrote that the retaliatory violence was hardly less barbaric than the first killings. People were shot in the road. Heads were mounted as warnings. Torture was used to wrench names from bodies. No reliable count exists for those murders. Contemporary estimates reach toward 120 or more. The vast majority uninvolved, some killed after helping white families hide. Special courts, Oyer and Terminer, sprang up in Jerusalem. Judges sat without juries. Proceedings were brief. Of those put on trial, 30 were executed, some were sold south as punishment, and the hunt for Turner intensified. For 10 weeks he hid within a few miles of where it started. His first hiding place was a storm-felled pine, whose root ball had pulled up a curtain of earth, leaving a cave-like space beneath. He expanded it with his hands, lined it with needles, camouflaged the entrance with fence rails and brush. Unless you stepped directly on it, you'd walk past. He lay there through the August and September heat, listening to dogs, to voices, to the random crack of fear-fired muskets. At night he crawled out just far enough to sip from a spring 20 yards away. He dared no fires. He ate when brave souls left wrapped cornbread or buried sweet potatoes, marked with quiet signs he could find in the dark. The psychological weight was relentless. From that dark pocket of earth he could hear the county teem with anger and panic, could imagine faces of those who had died, could guess at his wife's suffering under interrogation. He knew innocent people were killed because of what he began. He did not surrender. Meanwhile, White Southampton moved through weeks of a waking nightmare. Men slept with guns in reach. Women refused to be alone in their homes. Children stayed inside. Rumors snapped and echoed. Turner had fled north. Turner had raised a fresh band in the swamp. Plots were overheard in neighboring counties. 2 men in Sussex died on the strength of one woman's claim. Soldiers stopped people on the road, searched houses, whipped answers out of backs. The governor in Richmond read daily reports and looked northward for scapegoats, insisting abolitionists must be at work because admitting the enslaved could organize themselves was too unsettling a truth. After 6 weeks, Turner's food line snapped. The person who'd been feeding him, maybe the unnamed woman mentioned in court papers, was watched too closely to continue. He shifted tactics. For 2 weeks he moved only at night, slipping through woods and skirting farms, listening at the edge of human light. He learned most militias had returned home. Trials were underway and most of his men were dead or in chains. Twice he evaded patrols by inches, once pressed flat against a tree as lanterns swung beneath him, once catching the sound and smell of a campfire before walking into the circle of its light. He stayed in Southampton. He could have tried for the north. Others had. He knew how to read a sky, a map, a riverbank. But he did not run. Maybe he was waiting for a chance that never came. Maybe he could not leave the ground where his choices had planted so much grief. In early October he dug a new den under another fallen tree on land owned by Peter Edwards, less than a mile from the start. Authorities had already searched that area, which made it either a fool's choice or a gambler's. He deepened the space, collected roots and edible greens at night. He had to know the clock was almost out. On October 30th, a farmer named Benjamin Phipps walked his line with a shotgun. He noticed leaves laid just so, fence rails set with intention. He called out. A long pause. Then the rails shifted and Nat Turner crawled into the light. He was thin. His clothes were rags. His skin was bitten and raw. He did not run. When Phipps asked, "Are you Nat Turner?" he nodded. As they walked toward the house, Turner asked one thing. "How many of my men are alive?" "Not many," Phipps said. Turner said nothing more. By afternoon, people were crowding the road to see the man whose name had stalked their sleep. Phipps locked him in a shed overnight to keep him from a lynch mob and handed him over the next morning. In the Jerusalem jail, a young lawyer named Thomas R. Gray saw a book in Turner's capture, literally. He asked to interview him, to publish his words. The jailers agreed. Gray took notes as Turner talked and later printed the Confessions of Nat Turner. Historians still argue over how faithfully Gray transcribed Turner's voice, but across Gray's commentary another voice cuts through, calm, articulate, unshaken. Turner explained his visions, his readings, his plan. He named men mostly already dead or taken. When Gray pressed him about the reprisals and innocent lives lost, Turner said he had done as he believed God required. The deaths were grievous, but the cause was just. If time rewound, he would still act. Gray framed Turner as a religious madman. But even in Gray's pages, Turner's intelligence is hard to sand down. Plenty of readers, especially in the North, saw not insanity but a cold, clear calculation. Slavery was violence already. Fighting it with violence did not make the enslaved the greater criminals. The state waited to publish the confession until after trial. Trial came swiftly, November 5th. The outcome was never in question. Turner had confessed. People had seen him. The county wanted closure. A court-appointed lawyer, James Strange French, had nothing to work with. A jury wasn't even part of the process in these special courts. The judges deliberated less than an hour. Guilty, sentenced to hang on November 11th. In the 6 days between sentence and rope, ministers visited, urging repentance, insisting the voice he'd followed came from hell, not heaven. Turner refused. On the day of execution, a crowd swelled around the gallows. When asked for last words, he is said to have asked only, "Was not Christ crucified?" The trap fell. The neck broke. The body hung for an hour, as was the custom. What followed is hard to speak aloud. His remains were handled not as a man's but as an object, cut and parceled under the guise of study, souvenirs taken, a final attempt to erase the person and leave only a warning. In the long view, it failed. The warning turned into a symbol. You can kill a body. You cannot kill what a body came to stand for. The real reckoning rushed in after the rope went quiet. Laws changed. Walls tightened. The South's public face hardened from calling slavery a necessary evil to defending it as a positive good. And in Southampton, memory split. Black families whispering before Nat's War and after Nat's War. White families trying to live beside rooms that would never feel clean again. The rope went still, but the shockwaves did not. In the weeks after Nat Turner's execution, Virginia remade the boundaries of black life with ink and fear. New laws tightened like a fist. Teaching enslaved people to read or write became a crime. The logic was naked. If a man could read the Bible and find freedom in its pages, then the danger was not the man but the literacy. Punishment stiffened. White people who taught could be fined or jailed. Free black people who dared to teach could be whipped or sold back into bondage. Words became contraband. Religious life shrank to the size of white supervision. Gatherings of more than 5 enslaved people for worship, unless a white adult stood in the doorway and watched, were illegal. Independent black churches, those fragile sanctuaries where people sang themselves human after days spent as property, were shuttered or placed under a white eye. The law cut at movement too. A pass had to list destination, purpose, departure, and return. Patrols rode at night and treated the road as theirs. Men with little power anywhere else found it in the saddle, stopping any black person they pleased, checking papers, flexing the social order with a whip. Then came the poison in the well. Informants could be rewarded with freedom and money. The offer sounded like mercy but functioned like a knife. Trust, already fragile, thinned. Who could you whisper to when a whisper might be someone else's ticket out? The architects understood something cold and true. Rebellion needs solidarity. Solidarity needs trust. Destroy trust and you drown revolt in silence. Town life, which had offered small pockets of skill and wages for hire, closed its doors. Licenses grew hard to get. Urban anonymity, one of the few shields an enslaved person might find, was treated as a threat. Free black families learned how provisional free could be. Courts questioned their land titles. Officials denied work permits. Mobs did the rest. Some packed and left. North, if they could manage it. Liberia, if they accepted the American Colonization Society's ship. The message was cruel and clear. Your safety is not guaranteed. Your presence is tolerated only until we say otherwise. White households, meanwhile, reorganized themselves around a fresh, buzzing fear. The old plantation myth, we know our people. They love us. We treat them well. Couldn't survive the facts. Joseph Travis had not been known as a monster. He died all the same. Paternalism cracked. Doors were locked. Pistols slept under pillows. Knives were put away at night. Women refused to be alone with those who cooked their food and rocked their children. That unnatural intimacy, servitude performed inside the most private rooms, turned into a daily tremor. Economics drifted with the fear. The domestic slave trade swelled. Upper South states with tired soil, Virginia among them, sold thousands south to cotton country. It was commerce and it was policy. Selling people diffused concentrations of black communities, broke possible networks, turned mothers into keening and children into inventory numbers in ledgers hundreds of miles away. Sold south became a curse whispered to keep boys careful and girls quiet. Everyone knew what it meant. Fresh fields, harsher labor, overseers with shorter patience and longer whips, and goodbyes that never converted to reunions. Still, in that uneasy winter, a door cracked open in the Virginia legislature. Petitions arrived, not from radicals alone, but from citizens, some slaveholders, ready to ask aloud whether the system was moral, whether it even made economic sense. Thomas Jefferson Randolph, grandson of the principal author of those famous equal words, proposed gradual emancipation. The Assembly debated in January 1832 with a candor the state would not repeat for decades. Some said slavery cheapened white labor, that Virginia had stalled while northern states without slavery surged. Others said ending slavery would cost too much, would unleash a dangerous class of people upon the land, would obliterate property rights. Beneath the numbers and the speculation stood raw fear. The specter of Nat Turner sat in every sentence. The Haitian Revolution haunted the room. Men spoke as if the future had a pistol in its belt. The bill failed by 15 votes. 15. With it, Virginia's best chance, perhaps its last voluntary chance, to turn the wheel ended. In the years that followed, even asking such questions became a kind of career suicide. The window slammed shut and stayed that way until war barged in and shattered the frame. The South's argument for slavery hardened in the heat. Before Turner, many called slavery a sad necessity. After Turner, the loudest voices called it a blessing, a system ordained by God and supported by nature. Pulpits filled with sermons clutching verses out of context. Pamphlets wrapped prejudice in pseudoscience and called it proof. Politicians declared white liberty rested on black bondage, that only by keeping one race chained could the other race stand equal among themselves. The rhetoric did not calm the country. It shelved compromise and sharpened the line. In the North, abolitionists used Turner's story as evidence that slavery devoured the human spirit and provoked violence by existing at all. The more the South defended slavery as noble, the more the North recoiled. The more the North condemned, the more the South bristled. The middle ground grew thin and stony. Back in Southampton, time split into before Nat's War and after Nat's War. Black families passed stories in kitchens and in the hush between the day's last chore and sleep. Turner's name traveled softly, coded in songs and memories. He was hero, warning, ancestor, argument. He was all of it. Some insisted he proved that resistance was possible, that the enslaved were not the caricature the owners preferred. Others cursed what followed in his wake. The patrols, the laws, the fear that pressed against every hour. Complexity is honest. It doesn't make easy saints or easy villains. White families carried different freight. Children who hid in cellars, who lay motionless in swamps while branches snagged their clothes and mosquitoes fed, grew into adults who could not sleep without checking the window latch twice. Some packed for new counties. Some stayed and closed the doors early and lived with a room in the house that felt wrong, no matter how often it was scrubbed. Cherry Turner, Nat's wife, paid in ways history barely recorded. She was interrogated, tortured. She produced papers, perhaps pages of Nat's thoughts that have not survived. She and the children lived. After that, her story disappears from the official record, as so many black women's stories did. Did she tell her children that their father was righteous or reckless or both? Did she live to see freedom declared in 1865? Or did she leave the world before the news arrived? Questions sit where facts should be. That absence is its own kind of wound. When the Confessions of Nat Turner was published, it spread fast. Gray, the lawyer, framed the story to make his own argument. He wanted a mad prophet, a man drunk on visions. But between Gray's lines, readers heard something else. Clarity, not delirium. Faith, not froth. Northern readers tilted toward one conclusion. Southern readers toward another. The same ledger of words was entered twice, and two different balances were drawn. Frederick Douglass, who would escape slavery a few years later, understood the calculus. He didn't cheer violence for its own sake. He refused to pretend that the violence of rebellion outweighed the violence of the system that made rebellion seem like the only door. You cannot whip a people, sell their children, chain their marriages, and then call them savage when they fight back. That moral inversion would not stand. The years edged forward. The domestic trade kept breaking families. The rhetoric kept hardening. Congress twisted itself into bitter knots over territories and balance and power. And then war. Not because of one county or one uprising, but because millions of people, living inside a lie that called itself an economy, finally met the limits of pretending. When the war ended and the Constitution grew a new spine with the 13th Amendment, the paper said slavery was over. But laws cannot erase memory, and memory does not repair overnight. Southampton planted crops. Houses were rebuilt. Roads pushed through. The landscape returned to green. But the ground remembered. For a long time, public markers said little or said it in anodyne language. It took until the 1990s for Virginia to put up a historical marker that spoke the name clearly. The Rebecca Vaughn House, where people died during the uprising, survived the decades and was added to the National Register in 2006. Today, a driving tour traces the path. Travelers stop, read, and think. Small plaques attempt to balance scales that cannot be balanced. What do we do with a story like this? We tell it whole. We do not sand off the horror. We do not deny the motive. We resist the temptation to move quickly to lessons that keep us comfortable. We sit with the truth that enslaved people, human beings with names and families and stubborn dreams, wanted what everybody wants: safety, dignity, and the right to wake up in control of their own life. When that was refused at the point of a whip, some chose to fight. That choice killed the innocent. The retaliation killed the innocent. Suffering captured both sides, and beneath it all lay a system that required suffering as a fuel. There are other questions, and they are not gentle. Was violent resistance to slavery justified? Many will say yes without flinching, because slavery was violence already. Daily, normalized, legal. Others will say no because children died in their beds because innocence was not spared. The honest heart holds both truths and does not pretend the tension can be folded smooth. Turner was not a symbol carved from a single stone. He was a man. He believed he had heard from God. He believed he was appointed to act. He believed his death would not be the end of the story. On those points, the record is clear. What is also clear is the effect. After Southampton, the South chose repression over reform, ideology over doubt, and a deeper entanglement with slavery rather than loosening its grip. That choice shortened the road to war. A single county did not dictate a nation's fate, but it did show the nation its reflection and dared it to look. Walk those roads today and they look ordinary. Ditches, bar ditches, field edges, cedar posts, corn rising, a river turning slow in the heat. If you didn't know, you might roll down the window, let the air in, and think of anything else. But the land remembers. Somewhere under a row of pines, a boy once hid with his family while men on horses passed, and he learned the sound of bridle leather in the dark. Somewhere a woman pressed her palm to her mouth to keep from crying out, while the men in her house lay still forever in the room next door. Somewhere a man lay under a fallen tree for weeks, listening to boots and dogs and the incidental cruelty of laughter. The state kept trying to file those memories into drawers marked incident, disturbance, uprising, anything but rebellion or revolution. But language cannot lock a door that history has kicked open. The truth is not tidy. It is not symmetrical. It refuses to be arranged to spare our feelings. It asks us to sit with discomfort long enough to be changed by it. So what do we owe to this story? We owe the names we can recover and the silence we must respect where names have been lost. We owe the complexity. We owe the willingness to say that a man can be both devout and deadly, that an act can be both a cry for freedom and a blow that lands on the innocent. We owe the recognition that systems breed outcomes, that when you design a world where some people own other people, you design a world where violence is always waiting in the walls. And we owe attention, not just to the flash of August 1831, but to what followed: the literacy bans, the locked churches, the patrols that turned public roads into private power, the debates that almost shifted the future and then didn't, the pamphlets that tried to baptize bondage, the tears in kitchens, the long train of sales south, the rooms that never felt clean again, the songs that kept a man's name alive when saying it aloud could cost a life. In the end, Nat Turner's rebellion stands as a razor on the table of American memory. Touch it and you bleed. Ignore it and you still bleed, only slower, only in ways that stain everything without your noticing. The point is not to celebrate the killing, nor to sanctify the man, nor to excuse the aftermath's butchery by pointing at the uprising's first cut. The point is to be honest. The point is to learn the cost of pretending and the danger of forgetting. If you drive those roads, pull over where the marker stands, step out and listen. You won't hear voices. You'll hear wind and insects and perhaps a far dog. But memory works another way. It speaks inside you. It says this happened. It mattered. It still matters. It shaped the law on the page and the fear in the bones, the migration routes on the map and the stories whispered after lights out. It bent America closer to the conflict it kept postponing, and it carried forward an argument that reaches straight into our time. Who is free? And who gets to decide? And what will people risk when the answer is not you? The sky over Southampton turned green once, strange and unearthly, and one man took it as a sign. He gathered a handful of men with steady hands and breakable hearts, and for 2 days they broke the spell of inevitability. The cost was ruinous. The meaning is complicated. The memory is necessary. Tell it whole. Tell it without sedation. Tell it knowing that the story does not absolve or accuse cleanly, that it refuses the easy moral, that it keeps asking questions in the present tense. Tell it because the land remembers even when the lesson plans do not. Tell it because the dead deserve to be more than numbers, and the living deserve more than myths. Tell it because the truth, rough-edged and grief-heavy, is the only thing that can carry us anywhere worth going, and when you finish telling it, do not hurry to feel better. Sit with it. Let it change the way you read the words "all men are created equal." Let it sharpen your ear when someone says order and means obedience, when someone says tradition and means power. Let it steady your spine when you hear how people justify the unjust by calling it natural, or inevitable, or God's will. Remember Southampton, and remember that people born into cages do not always stay quiet. Remember what the county learned, then forgot, then learned again, that the human hunger for freedom is a force, and forces ignored do not go away. They gather. The rope went quiet. The law spoke, the books shut, but the questions stayed loud, and they still are.